A breakup started like many others, filled with arguments, cold silences, and attempts to move on. But the woman in this story couldn't let go. Her love transformed into hatred. Obsession consumed her. For the next 10 years, she relentlessly tried to ruin the life of the man she once lived with. Their failed relationship quickly devolved into a cycle of deceit, manipulation, and increasing violence. To understand how far she was willing to go, we need to go back to where it all started. Rob Parks was born in 1980 in a quiet suburb of Great Britain. He grew up as the middle child among 3 brothers. A good student, Rob focused on building a successful career. At 14, he moved north to study psychology and criminology at university. Though bright, he lacked self-confidence, was painfully shy around girls. That changed when he joined the University Drama Society. Within a year, he became its president. Acting helped transform him. His confidence grew. He began to open up socially. In 1990, Victoria Breeden joined the same drama society as an 18-year-old freshman. As the society's leader, Rob often interacted with her. He was instantly drawn to her. They began dating, and within 2 weeks, Victoria was practically living in Rob's dorm room. Her behavior soon struck other students as unusual. She insisted on spending every moment with Rob, even when it disrupted his studies. Deeply in love, Rob didn't see the red flags. Having little experience with women, he assumed this kind of intense closeness was normal. Still, even he couldn't ignore how obsessively attached Victoria had become. By then, Rob was 20 and Victoria 19. She gradually isolated him from everyone else, especially other women. Rob started to sense that something wasn't right. That summer, after finishing his exams, he insisted on breaking up, wanting to spend the holidays with his family without Victoria. Naturally, she resisted. She quickly found a way to manipulate him into resuming the relationship. Whenever Rob made plans to meet friends at a pub or go out, Victoria would call, claiming she felt unwell and might have endometriosis. She even underwent medical tests to prove it, though no diagnosis ever appeared in her records. Many of Rob's friends believed she was faking it to control him. Each time she complained about her health, Rob cancelled his plans and rushed to her side. After 3 years together, Rob had tried to end the relationship countless times, but never succeeded. Victoria was a skilled manipulator who always managed to reel him back in. They often broke up briefly. Rob even dated other women, but Victoria would always interfere, stalking and intimidating anyone new. One night in 2001, after yet another breakup, Rob met a new woman and invited her over. Just after they shut the door, someone began pounding on it furiously. It was Victoria. Even the neighbors recognized her by then. She claimed she had lost her keys and needed to stay the night. Rob, weary but kind-hearted, let her sleep in the spare room. The next morning, he woke up beside his new girlfriend to find Victoria lying on the floor next to them, staring at him. As soon as he opened his eyes, she started a fight. It was just one of many incidents showing how completely Victoria tried to dominate Rob's life. She refused to accept that he no longer wanted her. In May 2001, Rob graduated from university. Victoria continued stalking him, scaring off other women. Eventually, she wormed her way back into his life, and after both left the university town, they moved into a rented flat together. From that moment, life with Victoria became a waking nightmare. She spent nearly all day in bed, insisting she was seriously ill, a clear excuse to avoid working and keep Rob at her service. She isolated Rob from his friends and family. Everyone notices how badly she treats him. Victoria made him do almost everything for her, repaying him only with insults. Still, Rob believed she was truly sick and continued taking her to hospitals for tests. During one visit, a doctor quietly asked Rob whether his girlfriend really had any condition at all, noting that all her test results were normal. It was the same story at every hospital. After that conversations, Rob began to suspect that Victoria was faking her illness to manipulate him. But instead of facing the truth, he kept convincing himself she simply needed his care and understanding. Several more years passed. Victoria eventually completed her university degree, while Rob earned a master's in advertising. After graduating, they moved in with Rob's parents. It didn't take long for his family to notice that something was off. Victoria made little effort to communicate, instead creating invisible barriers that cut Rob and his parents off from each other. Her strange behavior was impossible to ignore. She spent most days lying in bed, while Rob acted as her full-time caretaker. Rod and Victoria lived there for several months before Rob tried, once again, to end the relationship. This time, Victoria went to extraordinary lengths to convince him they could fix things, but only if they lived on their own. Reluctantly, Rob agreed, and they soon moved into a place together in Milton Keynes. They married in April 2004, when Rob was 24 and Victoria 23. Their wedding was a small, quiet affair attended only by close family. But even at the ceremony, guests sensed something strange. There was no real joy between the bride and groom. After the wedding, they began their married life, living apart from his parents. From that moment, Victoria assumed total control over her husband's life. She criticized nearly everything he did. Her manipulation slowly eroded Rob's mental health. He began to suffer from insomnia, anxiety attacks, and long bouts of depression. Meanwhile, Victoria continued to complain about her supposed endometriosis, describing constant pain that, according to her, had plagued her for years. Eventually, she told Rob that a specialist had recommended an unusual solution. Having a baby, Rob wasn't keen on the idea, but Victoria knew how to persuade him. Before long, she became pregnant. In 2006, they welcomed a daughter. For the first time in 7 years, Rob had someone who truly gave his life meaning. He was working full-time at an advertising agency, proud of his achievements and focused on building a career. Everything seemed to be falling into place, except for Victoria. Her manipulative behavior only worsened. Whenever Rob was at work, she called constantly, claiming something was wrong with their child and demanding that he come home. Yet whenever he rushed back, he always found their daughter perfectly fine. By now, Victoria had completely isolated Rob from his friends and family. He kept his frustrations to himself, confiding to a few close acquaintances that he often felt trapped, that marrying Victoria had been the biggest mistake of his life. Shortly after their daughter's first birthday, Victoria announced she wanted another baby. She said it would be good for their daughter and might even strengthen their relationship. The conversation took place one day while they were driving. Without warning, Rob blurted out that he couldn't live like this anymore. After years of emotional torment, he told her he wanted a divorce and that he believed he could be a better father on his own. Victoria was stunned. She tried repeatedly to change his mind, but Rob stood firm. In April 2008, when their daughter was about 18 months old, he left the family home and contacted a divorce lawyer. After 4 years of marriage, it was finally over. Victoria remained in their house, while Rob rented a small flat, keeping his new address secret. For a time, he even stayed away from work, afraid Victoria might show up and try to win him back. Once free, Rob slowly rebuilt his life. He started dating again, made new friends, and reconnected with people from university. Victoria, meanwhile, didn't stay single for long. Barely a year after the divorce, she began dating a new man named Russell, who soon moved into the house she shared with Victoria and her daughter. She even forced the little girl to call him Daddy. Rob suspected that Victoria was doing it deliberately, just to hurt him. When their daughter was nearly 4 years old, Victoria called Rob in a panic. She claimed she was unwell and that their little girl had suddenly fallen seriously ill, needed to be rushed to the hospital. She insisted that the child was in critical condition. Terrified, Rob dropped everything and drove nearly 200 kilometers to get there. But when he arrived, he was stunned to find his daughter sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed. Doctors ran several tests and found absolutely nothing wrong with her. Victoria, however, continued to insist that her daughter was suffering from a variety of ailments: constipation, allergies, fever, you name it. Rob visited the hospital every day, increasingly confused. One afternoon, his daughter told him something that deeply unsettled him. Every night, her mother put a hot water bottle in her bed and closed all the windows. Even though it was the middle of summer, it suddenly clicked for Rob. Victoria might be faking or even inducing her daughter's illness. The thought horrified him. Months later, Victoria and Russell showed up at Rob's house, demanding that he return some of their daughter's clothes that had been left behind during a recent visit. Rob calmly told her that the clothes were in the wash and he'd drop them off later. That's when Victoria suddenly turned hostile. She began shouting insults, tried to push her way inside. When Rob blocked the doorway, she deliberately fell backward, screamed that he had attacked her. Russell had witnessed the entire exchange, and even he seemed confused. Victoria immediately called the police, but after officers arrived and listened to both sides, they concluded that Rob hadn't done anything wrong. He had merely stopped his ex-wife from forcing her way into his home. The police refused to take further action. Victoria was furious. And from that moment, Rob could tell she wasn't finished with him yet. A few months later, Victoria suddenly refused to let Rob see their daughter again, claiming that the child had become gravely ill once more. She even said she couldn't obtain one of the girl's prescribed medications. Suspicious. Rob checked the details and discovered that the drug in question wasn't suitable for children at all. That's when everything fell into place. He managed to review parts of his daughter's medical records, and there, among the doctor's notes, he saw a reference to possible Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone else, usually to gain attention or sympathy. Rob was shaken. He realized that his daughter wasn't sick. Victoria was making her sick. Over time, Rob noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever his daughter stayed with him, she was perfectly healthy, but as soon as she went back to her mother, strange, unexplainable symptoms returned. Rob began to suspect that Victoria was deliberately harming their child just to manipulate him or force him to come running back. In early 2011, Victoria gave birth to another child, this time with her new partner, Russell. Around the same period, Rob met a woman named Jane through mutual friends, and later that year, the two married. But what should have been a peaceful new beginning quickly turned into something far darker. Soon after the wedding, Rob began receiving disturbing late-night phone calls from an unknown number. No one spoke on the other end, only the sound of heavy, deliberate breathing. At first, he dismissed it as a cruel prank. But as the calls grew more frequent and persistent, fear set in. Convinced that someone was watching him, Rob went to the police to report that he was being stalked. Detectives traced the anonymous calls and discovered they were all coming from burner phones, prepaid devices, and SIM cards purchased without registration. Several of the numbers were eventually linked to real individuals, but when investigators contacted them, the responses were baffling. Each of these people claimed they had been trying to buy illegal substances from a man named Rob Parks. Police immediately launched an investigation, but Rob had never been involved in criminal activity, let alone illegal substances. He was a clean-cut professional with no record and a deep aversion to anything illegal. When questioned, Rob was stunned. He denied everything and insisted that someone was trying to frame him. Detectives soon confirmed his story. There was no evidence connecting him to illegal substances, distribution of any kind. Still, the situation left him deeply shaken. Rob couldn't shake the feeling that only one person could be behind this: his ex-wife, Victoria Breeden. But without proof, there was little anyone could do. Then, just as abruptly as they had begun, the calls and messages stopped. Victoria, however, didn't stop meddling in Rob's life. She continued to make co-parenting nearly impossible, blocking his attempts to spend time with their daughter. When the girl turned 6, Rob planned a special trip to Disneyland, but Victoria flatly refused to give permission. Not long after, Victoria broke up with Russell and started dating a new man named Wayne Wood, a soldier in the British Army. She proudly announced she would follow him wherever he was stationed, even to Germany, where he was soon to be deployed. She intended to take both her children with her. Rob, fearing he would lose all contact with his daughter, fought back. The custody battle began. During this tense period, a shocking incident occurred. Wayne suddenly appeared at Rob's home, shouting accusations at him, claiming that Rob had abused his own daughter. Rob was horrified. The allegations were unimaginable. He immediately realized Victoria was behind this. She had told Wayne outrageous lies, manipulating him, just as she had done to everyone else in her life. Rob denied everything, and the confrontation eventually fizzled out, but the damage was done. Victoria's obsession with destroying him was escalating. Soon after, the harassment took on a new form. Rob began receiving anonymous messages from unknown numbers, calling him a child abuser and threatening violence. The messages were traced and documented. Again, Rob was certain it was Victoria, but police couldn't gather sufficient evidence to link them to her. Victoria then crossed an unthinkable line. In a calculated move to accuse Rob of child abuse, she coached their daughter to tell classmates that her father had hurt and molested her. When the story reached teachers, Child Protective Services launched an investigation, but during their first interview, the truth came out. The little girl had been coerced by her mother into lying. The case was quickly closed, and no charges were filed against Rob. Yet, unbelievably, Victoria faced no punishment for the false accusation. As the custody hearing approached, Rob could only hope it would finally end her campaign of harassment. Eventually, the court ruled in his favor. Victoria was forbidden from taking their daughter out of the country. Furious at the verdict, Victoria handed the child over to Rob and his wife Jane, then cut off nearly all contact with her. But rather than moving on, she began plotting something even darker. In October 2013, Rob received another chilling anonymous message, this time a death threat. The sender warned they would burn his house down. After years of psychological abuse, Rob had grown almost numb to the harassment. He chose not to report it. Then, on New Year's Eve 2013, police unexpectedly showed up at his home. They told Rob that an emergency call had been made, reporting a fire at his address. Everything seemed fine, and Rob explained his long history of stalking, harassment by his ex-wife. Officers took his statement seriously and promised to trace the source of the fake call, but before they could, the threats became real. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, Rob was jolted awake by the deafening sound of the fire alarm. Looking out the window, he saw his Audi engulfed in flames. He immediately shouted for his wife and daughter to run out the back door. Seconds later, a massive explosion shook the entire house. As the fire crew rushed to the scene, Rob's phone buzzed again. Another message, once more accusing him of child abuse and promising death. Fortunately, the blaze was contained before it reached the house, but the family was left deeply traumatized. It took his daughter nearly 6 months to recover from the terror of that night. Naturally, police opened an investigation into the car fire and explosion. In 2014, Victoria moved to Germany with Wayne. Their daughter stayed in England with Rob and his new wife, Jane. For a while, Rob allowed himself to hope that distance would stop the harassment. He underestimated Victoria. Not long after, officers informed Rob that Victoria and Wayne had been stopped trying to smuggle firearms back into the UK from Germany. Months later, investigators concluded Wayne had been behind the false arson report. He was charged with making a false statement and with setting Rob's car alight. Victoria was summoned back to the UK for questioning, and police searched the house the pair had previously occupied, but came away without evidence tying her to the hoax call, so she initially avoided prosecution. Wayne, however, was convicted for the arson-related offences and later sentenced to 7 years in prison. Shortly after his conviction, Victoria filed for divorce. By late 2018, it had been roughly 10 years since Rob and Victoria separated. Their daughter was 12. Rob was 38. He had tried hard to move on, but Victoria refused to let him. Then a man named Graham Wall messaged Rob, claiming to know Victoria, warning that she was dangerous. Rob didn't know Graham, assumed it was another trap. He ignored the message, and nearly a year passed. Then detectives contacted Rob again, saying a new threat had emerged. He agreed to meet them. To his surprise, they arrived with a local TV journalist and said his family would be featured in a documentary. Detectives told him they suspected his ex-wife had tried to hire someone to kill him. Graham turned out not to be some random stranger, but Victoria's newest boyfriend, a man she'd met on a dating site. They'd been together only a few weeks when she tearfully told him their daughter was living in appalling conditions and begged him to help rescue the child. Shockingly, she quickly urged Graham to kill Rob or find someone who would. Graham, appalled, suggested they contact Child Protective Services or pursue custody through the courts instead. Victoria dismissed him and called his objections a bad joke. Still uneasy, Graham planted a small recording device in the couple's flat. What he expected to capture, evidence of infidelity, turned out to be far worse. On tape, Victoria met with a man and discussed murdering her ex-husband. The recording captured detailed talk of setting Rob's car on fire to lure him outside and then bludgeoning him with a brick. On October 8, 2019, Graham took the recording to police. An attempted murder investigation was opened immediately. Victoria, far from panicking, presented herself at the police station the next day and claimed her personal belongings had been stolen, including the phone Graham had allegedly given to detectives. She tried to turn the story around, accusing Graham of framing her, even suggesting he had plotted the murder himself. A closer review of the audio, however, made the situation unmistakable. Victoria had been speaking with a man named Earl Gernon, an individual known to police for a criminal past and willing to arrange violent acts for money. The tape showed she had been shopping for a hitman. She repeatedly rehearsed lurid, fabricated allegations about Rob and described in cold detail how she wanted him caught, bound, led into the woods and killed. By the time police briefed Rob, Victoria was already under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Earl was also brought to the station. He claimed their relationship had been casual and that he had not taken Victoria's requests seriously, even though, with his help, she had identified at least 3 potential killers. The trial began in early 2020, drawing the attention of many men whom Rob had never even met before. Each of them took the stand to testify that Victoria had approached them, trying to hire them as hitmen to kill her ex-husband. To justify her actions, she told them that Rob was a child abuser and claimed she only wanted to save her daughter from him. Investigators later discovered that Victoria had been searching for someone to carry out the murder as far back as 2014, offering different sums of money, up to 5,000 British pounds, to anyone willing to do it. Before the trial, Victoria was examined by several psychiatrists. Surprisingly, all of them agreed that she was completely sane and fully aware of her actions. Ultimately, she was found guilty on 3 counts of soliciting to commit murder. The court sentenced her to 9 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving roughly half her term. This means that Victoria Breeden could appear before the parole board for the first time by the end of 2025. In the aftermath, Rob spoke openly to journalists, expressing his frustration that Victoria would remain part of his life for years to come. He feared that once released, she might try to contact their daughter again. Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant. Before her son was born, Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his fourth. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity, and deceit. Returned home after giving her statement, despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled 2 relationships, maintaining 2 homes and nearly entering into 2 marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. Her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who were raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13th, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her. The family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases near where the body was found. Police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the 2 police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter bloody and injured near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility, but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Guthrie. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years, until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence. 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Alice Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Guthrie, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes. Roberta Saggiassi grew up in the small town of Vasto, in the province of Chieti, Abruzzo, southeastern Italy. Her parents, along with most of her extended family, also lived there. She shared a particularly close bond with her mother. They confided in each other and were always in touch. From a young age, Roberta was known for her outgoing nature, kind heart, and cheerful personality. She excelled as a student and developed a deep passion for cooking, particularly showcasing her talent in baking pies and cakes. She was well liked by her peers and cherished spending time with her many friends. After completing public school, Roberta enrolled in Italy's School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. At the age of 20, she began working at the most renowned bakery in her hometown, owned by the Lello family. Every family member participated in the bakery's operations, and Roberta became close friends with Fabio Di Lello, the younger son, who was her age and worked alongside her. Spending so much time together Their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Both families were very supportive of they. Roberta's parents took an immediate liking to Fabio, and Fabio's parents admired Roberta for her strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. By the age of 25, Roberta and Fabio had moved in together, sharing a rented apartment while saving money to buy their own home. Fabio, a passionate and dedicated soccer player since childhood, had achieved notable success. He served as the captain of the city's soccer team and performed impressively in amateur tournaments. In 2014, he made his debut in Serie D, the highest amateur soccer division under the Italian National League Federation. In 2015, Roberta and Fabio achieved a milestone in their lives. That autumn, they celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony and moved into a spacious and cozy house of their own. They were overjoyed and excited about their future, making plans they were eager to fulfill, plans that would tragically never come to fruition. On the morning of Friday, July the 1st, 2016, Roberta, then 34, called her mother as she did every day. She suggested having dinner that evening at her parents' house, intending to gather everyone there to share exciting news. Keeping the announcement a surprise, she planned to reveal it at dinner and agreed with her mother to prepare the meal and set the table together. Around 2 p.m., Roberta left her house on her scooter, heading to her parents' home, just a few kilometers away, a trip that usually took about 10 minutes. Tragically, Roberta never arrived. While passing through one of the busiest intersections in town and carefully obeying traffic rules, a Fiat Punto sped through a red light from the opposite lane and collided violently with her scooter. The car then crashed into another vehicle. The force of the impact threw Roberta into a metal pole and onto the sidewalk. She sustained a severe, traumatic brain injury, lost a significant amount of blood, and was barely alive by the time emergency services arrived. Paramedics were astonished that Roberta was still alive, given the extent of her injuries. She was rushed to the nearest hospital and immediately taken into surgery. Despite the efforts of the top surgeons, who worked tirelessly for nearly an hour, her injuries were simply too severe. Roberta passed away without regaining consciousness. The drivers of the other two vehicles involved in the crash suffered only minor injuries and did not require hospitalization. The driver of the Fiat Punto was identified as 21-year-old local resident Italo De Lisa. He remained at the scene visibly shaken and did not attempt to flee. He waited for the police to arrive, cooperated fully, and explained what had happened. He admitted he had briefly taken his eyes off the road and failed to notice the traffic light turning red. By the time he realized, it was too late to avoid the collision. After hitting Roberta's scooter, he panicked, swerved into oncoming traffic, and struck another car. He willingly handed over his documents and underwent a toxicology screening at the hospital, which confirmed that he was not under the influence of alcohol or any banned substances. Witnesses and officers noted his profound remorse. Upon learning later that Roberta had not survived, he was overcome with distress and nearly collapsed. Fabio was the first to hear the devastating news. He rushed to the hospital just minutes after his wife, Roberta, had been brought in. In the hallway, he broke down, crying and praying, desperately pleading for updates from every doctor and nurse who entered or left the operating room. About 30 minutes later, the surgeon came out and, after a pause, informed Fabio that they had done everything possible, but Roberta could not be saved. Fabio's reaction was heartbreaking. Stunned and in denial, he repeatedly begged to see Roberta, clinging to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was inescapable. She had passed away. As the reality sunk in, Fabio was overtaken by grief and anger. Overwhelmed, he reportedly wanted to confront the person responsible immediately. Hospital staff had to physically restrain him and escort him to a private room where he was given a sedative to calm down. At the same time, Italo, the driver responsible for the crash, was deeply shaken, repeatedly saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Roberta's parents were growing anxious. Their daughter was overdue and not answering her phone. They began calling Fabio, who initially didn't pick up. When he finally answered, he tearfully broke the tragic news. Within 15 minutes, both Roberta's and Fabio's families gathered at the hospital, struggling to process the devastating loss. Their vibrant and joyful lives, filled with dreams and plans, had been shattered in an instant. Instead of celebrating Roberta and Fabio's upcoming anniversary, they were now faced with the unimaginable task of saying goodbye to her. Roberta was laid to rest on July 3, 2016, just 2 months before what would have been her and Fabio's first wedding anniversary. The farewell took place in the same church where they had recently pledged their love and commitment. The priest who officiated their wedding also led this deeply somber memorial service. The small church overflowed with mourners. So many people came that not everyone could fit inside. Roberta was beloved and well respected in her community, and friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor her memory and support her grieving family. The tragedy left the entire town in shock. Few could believe she was truly gone. The man responsible for the fatal crash, Italo, did not flee the scene. He cooperated fully and underwent medical testing at the hospital. He was completely sober and had no history of mental illness or emotional instability. The crash happened at a busy intersection, equipped with multiple traffic cameras. The police reviewed footage from 4 different angles, clearly capturing the accident. Investigators also retrieved surveillance videos showing the routes both drivers took prior to the crash. The footage revealed that both vehicles had adhered to traffic laws and speed limits. However, at the crucial moment, Italo failed to stop at a red light. He drove through the intersection, colliding with the scooter Roberta was riding. After hitting Roberta, Italo's Fiat Punto struck another car coming from the opposite direction. Fortunately, the driver of the second car was not seriously injured, and his vehicle damage was covered by insurance, so he did not pursue legal action. Tragically, Roberta's injuries were far too severe to be treated. Italo expressed his deep regret, claiming he had been distracted for just a moment. Despite his regret, nothing could ease the pain of Roberta's loved ones, particularly Fabio, who struggled to suppress his anger toward the man responsible. The 21-year-old driver, Italo, was arrested and formally charged with involuntary harm, causing fatal injuries. He was placed in pre-trial detention while awaiting the court proceedings. He did not contest the charges, declaring that he was ready to accept any punishment imposed. Fabio closely followed every development in the investigation. He meticulously reviewed all available evidence and met with detectives daily in his search for answers and any additional leads. Fabio strongly rejected the official findings, convinced that Italo or his family had influenced the authorities to minimize his responsibility for the accident. Fabio believed the crash was caused by substance use and was determined to keep the case in the public eye. Fabio organized protests and marches, demanding full accountability from Italo for the fatal accident. Many people, especially those who had known Roberta, supported him. Fabio also launched an aggressive online campaign against Italo and his family, accusing him of intentional misconduct, banned substance use, and claiming that his relatives had bribed officials to tamper with the toxicology report. His social media posts, filled with accusations and cries for justice, appeared daily. On July 15, 2016, Fabio organized a memorial march for Roberta, attended by hundreds, carrying her photos and signs demanding justice. Fabio's rhetoric grew more intense, threatening further demonstrations and even suggesting, during emotional outbursts, that he might take matters into his own hands if the authorities failed to act. His increasingly confrontational tone stirred public outrage but also alarmed Italo's family, who began fearing for their safety. Fabio's hostility toward Italo was evident as he worked to sway public opinion against him. Fabio's actions hinted at a willingness to disregard the law to seek retribution. In response, Italo's family filed for a court order to protect themselves, citing Fabio's harassment and threats. The case remained under investigation with incomplete evidence, but the situation was becoming dangerously volatile and required urgent legal action. On July 20th, Fabio was issued a court order barring him from accusing Italo of a crime, inciting hatred, posting harmful content online, or encouraging hostility toward Italo or his family. Fabio complied, but abruptly withdrew from public advocacy, leaving others unsettled by his silence. Every day, Fabio visited the grave of his late wife, Roberta, bringing fresh flowers. He spent hours there, sometimes standing silently, other times kneeling, crying, or praying. His family, hoping he just needed time to grieve, chose not to intervene, but his behavior only escalated. Fabio erected a memorial at the accident site and turned Roberta's gravesite into a detailed tribute with photos from their happiest moments. He began spending entire days at the cemetery. He quit soccer, his lifelong passion, and stopped going to work. Nothing seemed to matter to Fabio anymore. His life revolved around the flower-covered grave. He ate little, lost significant weight, and looked pale and exhausted. Within weeks, he appeared drastically older, withdrawn from others. Fabio grew disconnected from reality. One morning, cemetery staff found Fabio at Roberta's grave before opening hours. He had climbed the fence overnight, saying he needed to be close to her. He told relatives he couldn't bear staying in their home, filled with memories of Roberta. Only at her gravesite did he feel any peace. Fabio spoke to her as though she was still alive, refusing to refer to her in the past tense. Fabio's older brother suggested a brief trip to Rome to help him clear his head, but Fabio refused, insisting he couldn't leave Roberta alone in the cemetery. This was a clear sign that Fabio needed more than the support of loved ones. He required urgent professional psychiatric care. Fabio's brother and other family members dismissed his concerning words and erratic behavior, believing time would heal him. Unfortunately, they were tragically wrong. Meanwhile, the parents of Italo, who was still in custody, hired a top attorney to defend their son. The lawyer was confident from the start, highlighting that Italo had no prior criminal record, rarely broke traffic laws, and tested sober at the time of the incident. While the attorney admitted that running a red light was a mistake, he argued there was no evidence to support serious charges, such as premeditated intent. He also pointed out that Italo had followed the speed limit throughout his drive, and it remained unclear what had distracted him. To support their case, the defense presented character testimonials from Italo's school and workplace, as well as evidence of his volunteer work in environmental causes and his enrollment in firefighter training courses. Italo had planned to dedicate himself to public service after finishing his certification exams. During the trial, the defense submitted surveillance footage showing Roberta on her scooter without a helmet, which violated safety regulations. The attorney argued that wearing a helmet could have lessened the severity of her injuries and perhaps even saved her life. Considering this footage, Italo's clean record, and Roberta's safety oversight, the court modified his pre-trial conditions. He was released under judicial supervision shortly before Christmas 2016, with the final decision scheduled for February 2017. Other than a few restrictions, Italo resumed a normal life. When Fabio learned that the man responsible for the accident had been released, he was consumed by rage. In court, he shouted and tried to physically confront Italo and Italo's attorney. Family members struggled to hold him back, and the judge ordered him to be removed from the courtroom. After Italo's release, Fabio became sleepless, angry, and withdrawn. He spent countless hours by Roberta's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. Despite Fabio's worsening mental state, his family did not seek professional help. They thought he just needed more time to heal. When they suggested seeing a mental health specialist, Fabio reacted with hostility. He began accusing the justice system of being corrupt and incapable of delivering a fair outcome. When Italo was allowed to await trial out of custody, Fabio completely lost faith in the law. He decided to take matters into his own hands, but didn't reveal his plans to anyone. His behavior shifted noticeably. He became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. Fabio had an interest in firearms dating back to his youth. He regularly visited shooting ranges and, in 2006, obtained a firearm license, purchasing a 9mm pistol that he kept secured in a safe at home. Now consumed by thoughts of vengeance, he started handling the weapon often, convinced that it was his only means of achieving justice. As New Year's approached, Fabio's social media activity took a dark turn. He began posting about justice, revenge, and reflections on life's meaning, lamenting how his own life had lost purpose. These posts were deeply troubling, but sadly, they went unnoticed. In January, Fabio began secretly following Italo to avoid drawing attention. Fabio observed his daily routines, the places he visited, and the people he interacted with. Using this information, Fabio devised a plan. On February 1st, 2017, he took a loaded pistol and went to a bar on Via Perth, a location Italo frequented and close to his home. Fabio entered the bar to confirm Italo was there. After spotting him, he left quietly and found a discreet location nearby to wait. Around 9:30 p.m., Italo exited the bar, chatted briefly with friends, and was about to head home. At that moment, Fabio confronted him. Italo sensed something was wrong, and both men froze briefly. Then Fabio pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. The first shot struck Italo in the abdomen, the second near his heart, and the third, a headshot, ensured there was no chance of survival. Fabio, an experienced marksman, executed the act with precision, leaving no room for error. Afterward, Fabio walked calmly to his car. Witnesses, shocked by what they had seen, were too afraid to intervene, knowing he likely wouldn't hesitate to use the weapon again. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Italo was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed witnesses and were able to identify Fabio as the perpetrator. When officers went to his house, he wasn't there. Fabio's family, upon learning what happened, informed police of where he was likely headed. Authorities intercepted him on his way to the cemetery. Fabio had planned to end his life at Roberta's grave after what he believed was an act of justice over her death. However, police arrived before he could carry out the plan. He didn't resist arrest, showed no emotion, and openly admitted to the crime. At the police station, Fabio broke down. He spoke of his intense love for his wife, Roberta, and his anger with the justice system for allowing Italo to walk free after the car accident that killed her. Then he revealed an even deeper motive. Roberta had been pregnant. Though it was still early in the pregnancy, they had discovered the news just one day before the fatal crash. Roberta had planned to surprise their families with the announcement during dinner, a moment that never came. The accident had taken both her and their unborn child. Fabio said his actions were retaliation for the loss of not just his wife, but also the future they were building. He expressed that he had nothing left to live for, wanting only to reunite with his family. After his arrest, Fabio was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with acute psychological trauma caused by profound grief. However, the court determined that Fabio had acted deliberately and with full awareness of his actions. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. While awaiting trial, Fabio made several attempts to harm himself and was placed under strict supervision. On March 24, 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Fabio showed no emotion during the verdict, appearing detached from the moment. His family and legal team appealed the sentence, which was later reduced to 20 years. In prison, Fabio reportedly turned to religion for some solace, but never fully recovered from the loss of his wife and unborn child. It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear: Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along, perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy. They agreed to meet at around 5 p.m., but when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. but the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested, but even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Diaz met Jared James Dekas while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Tuckeria, Texas. At the time, Angie was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angie is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angie longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angie and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angie's co-workers at Cheppy's meat market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angie's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angie after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angie hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angie and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angie, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's meat market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angie kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angie seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired, though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship. Jared's arrest for driving under the influence just a month into their marriage was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angie likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angie and Jared's marriage. While Angie had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angie's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angie later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angie seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angie's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Chepi's Meat Market and Taqueria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angie and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angie, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11th, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angie's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angie lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angie's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angie's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angie. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angie's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angie. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angie in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angie. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angie had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angie had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angie's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angie's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angie's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angie. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angie's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angie's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angie's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angie's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angie. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angie's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angie's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angie's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angie's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angie's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angie's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angie back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angie's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angie's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angie's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angie before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angie remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angie's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angie's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old Mackenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebot Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at Mackenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. Mackenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. Mackenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. Mackenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebot Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their on-again, off-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from Mackenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. Mackenzie's friends later revealed Mackenzie lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to Mackenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. Mackenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield, but beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. Mackenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire. A woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. Mackenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, Mackenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near Mackenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting Mackenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that Mackenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over Mackenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that Mackenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through Mackenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. Mackenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between Mackenzie and Thompson, showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to Mackenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored Mackenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "Mackenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." Mackenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how Mackenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son, but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports, later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at Mackenzie's apartment that night, despite the AVO, but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that Mackenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her, though his story shifted under scrutiny with inconsistencies about the sequence of events. He denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence. The broken knife, Mackenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to Mackenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed Mackenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of Mackenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence: knife fragments bearing Mackenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of Mackenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of Mackenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of Mackenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing Mackenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against Mackenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized Mackenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1st, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left Mackenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and Mackenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from Mackenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackert. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While Mackenzie's family continues their advocacy, the appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For Mackenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of Mackenzie's life, or will it fall short again? Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York, the youngest of 2 brothers. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a well-known and highly respected surgeon in the community. After finishing high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the U.S. However, due to his low grades, he was not admitted to any of them. Eventually, he gained acceptance to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his journey toward becoming a doctor. In 1978, 18 years old, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club during a visit to his hometown. It was love at first sight. Anthony, tall and charming, swept Deborah off her feet as they danced to Donna Summer's Last Dance. Soon after meeting, they began a relationship. Despite their long-distance relationship, while Anthony studied in Puerto Rico and Deborah worked in New York, their love affair continued. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York, in a financially struggling family. She worked as a pharmacy assistant. In 1985, after graduating as an ENT doctor from medical school in Puerto Rico, Anthony returned to New York, obtained a medical license, and started working as a surgeon at a local hospital. However, his colleagues criticized his skills, calling him incompetent and predicting an unremarkable career. Despite this, he managed to keep his job. That same year, Anthony and Deborah got married. Early in their marriage, Deborah discovered through a friend that Anthony was having an affair. When she confided in her father, he advised her to forgive Anthony, but only once. Deborah decided to give him another chance. Not long after, they welcomed a son, and a year later, a daughter. They moved into a large home in suburban Buffalo, where Anthony started his own surgical practice. He rented office space in a private clinic and began seeing patients. By 1990, 30 years old, Anthony gained attention for inventing a wig prosthesis that was attached to the scalp using metal pins implanted in the skull. He became his own first client, as he had begun losing his hair at the age of 23. This wig became his patented invention. With prices starting at $3,500, clients could choose from a variety of natural and synthetic hair options. This invention contributed to his local fame. Anthony also performed cosmetic surgeries, such as breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuctions, and more. His services were competitively priced, and he often ran promotions to attract clients. Over the next 7 years, Anthony became wealthy and locally renowned, even driving a red Lamborghini. However, his reputation concealed the troubling events that were occurring in his operating room. In 1997, Terry Lamarty, a mother of 4, struggled to lose excess belly fat despite regular exercise. On her 39th birthday, her husband gave her a voucher for a belly liposuction treatment at Anthony's clinic. Excited, she scheduled a consultation with Anthony. During their meeting, she was impressed by his charisma and reassurances, which put her at ease. Anthony assured her that the procedure would go smoothly. Terry began preparing for the operation, undergoing necessary medical tests, consulting specialists, and completing the required paperwork. The surgery was scheduled for June 1997. On the day of her scheduled procedure at 8:30 a.m., Terry's husband drove her to the clinic. Upon arrival, she went to see Anthony to be examined and given medication to prepare for the surgery. He then wheeled her into the clinic's basement, referred to as the surgical center. To Terry's shock, the room looked nothing like a sterile operating theater. It was just an ordinary basement furnished with a couch, a table, and chairs. She didn't see any proper surgical equipment. Feeling uneasy, she tried to express her desire to cancel the operation, but she was already under the effects of the medication. Her speech slurred, and she lost control of her body. Before passing out, she helplessly screamed. Terry regained consciousness at 5 p.m., fully clothed and sitting on a small sofa in the clinic's first-floor waiting room. Her husband arrived shortly after and took her home. Once home, Terry noticed blood running down her legs. Panicked, she examined herself and found a roughly 10 centimeter long and 2 centimeter deep surgical incision on her stomach, poorly closed with about 20 metal staples. Alarmed, she and her husband immediately called Anthony over the phone. He dismissed their concerns, claiming the blood was excess surgical fluid and telling them not to worry. He assured them the wound was minor and advised Terry to rest and visit him the next morning. That night, Terry's pain became unbearable, worsening by the hour. She also experienced severe nausea and vomiting. By morning, she couldn't endure it anymore and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Anthony's stitches were blocking blood flow to her abdomen, causing some tissue to necrotize. On top of that, her intestines had been damaged during the procedure, leading to an infection in the wound. Instead of achieving her desired appearance, Terry was now fighting for her life. Fortunately, she received help in time and survived. A few days later, at 2:30 just while Terry was still recovering in the hospital, she was startled awake by Anthony. He had secretly entered her room and was holding her medical records. He demanded that she immediately pack her belongings and leave the hospital. Terrified, Terry refused and argued with him. Hospital nurses overheard the confrontation, and Anthony was forced to leave. After this alarming encounter, Terry remained in the hospital for several more days. Her recovery stretched on for months, and despite doctors reporting the incident to the State Department of Health, Anthony continued practicing medicine. 2 months later, in August 1997, a more tragic event occurred at Anthony's clinic. 26-year-old Sarah Smith, a mother of 2, underwent breast implant surgery, a procedure she had long dreamed of. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Anthony called an ambulance, but when paramedics arrived, they found him trying to clear Sarah's airway using a wire hanger. The clinic lacked even basic life-saving medical equipment, like a ventilation device. Paramedics resuscitated Sarah on site and transported her to the hospital, but she had already fallen into a coma. After a week in intensive care, Sarah passed away on September 1st, 1997. News of Sarah's death quickly spread, sparking a media frenzy. Anthony admitted that Sarah had stopped breathing during the surgery. He said he performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation and injected her with lidocaine, but it was ineffective. Ultimately, he instructed his assistants to call for an ambulance. An investigation by the Herald Police Department revealed that Sarah's death was caused by asphyxia due to severely low oxygen levels, which led to cardiac arrest. A toxicology report further showed that Anthony had administered a dangerously high dose of 2 muscle-relaxing drugs during the procedure, leaving Sarah unable to breathe on her own. After Sarah's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Anthony Pignataro's medical license. Shortly thereafter, the Erie County District Attorney's Office in New York launched an investigation. Anthony, who had an inflated self-image, had opened his own plastic surgery clinic but failed to hire an anesthesiologist or adequately trained staff. Instead, his wife, Deborah, assisted him despite having only 6 months of medical training. Additionally, a young female medical student interned at the clinic. During Sarah's procedure, both Deborah and the intern reported that Sarah woke up mid-surgery, screaming. In response, Anthony administered additional drugs, causing Sarah to lose consciousness once again. Deborah noticed that Sarah's oxygen levels had dropped to a dangerously low level and alerted Anthony, but he ignored her and continued the operation. Shortly after, Sarah's lips turned blue. She stopped breathing, and her heart eventually stopped. Investigators interviewed Anthony's colleagues and patients, uncovering a reputation for gross incompetence and recklessness. Many of his patients had suffered complications following surgeries. For instance, 78 years old, Sophie Butring underwent a tummy tuck performed by Anthony. She became ill after the procedure, but was hesitant to seek medical attention. Her son eventually convinced her to go to the hospital, which saved her life. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, recovering from complications caused by the surgery. The New York State Board of Health eventually filed 30 charges of professional misconduct against Anthony. Investigators discovered that he was not licensed to perform plastic surgery and that his basement clinic was grossly unfit for medical procedures. In January 1998, Anthony, then 38 years old, was arrested. By August of that year, his medical license was permanently revoked. Anthony ultimately accepted a plea deal on a negligent homicide charge and was sentenced to 6 months in prison, fined $5,000, and ordered to complete 250 hours of community service. He was also permanently banned from practicing medicine. As the verdict was announced, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody immediately. Deborah, who was visibly upset in the courtroom, was not allowed to say goodbye to her husband. However, if Deborah had known what lay ahead, she likely would not have shed any tears. In December 1998, Anthony was released from jail. He returned home to live with his wife and children, but struggled to find work. During this time, his mother provided financial support. Despite the challenges, he resumed an extramarital affair, which his wife, Deborah, eventually discovered. Furious, she kicked him out of the house. 2 months later, he returned, begging for a second chance, and she reluctantly took him back. By May 1999, Deborah, then 42 years old, suddenly fell gravely ill. She suffered episodes of nausea and body pain, which gradually worsened to include tingling in her arms and legs, difficulty walking, and extended periods confined to bed. Although Deborah sought medical help, doctors were initially unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. Over the following months, her condition continued to deteriorate. By the summer of 1999, she required a wheelchair and began experiencing memory loss. Anthony claimed her symptoms were caused by a diseased gallbladder, which he insisted needed urgent removal. However, Deborah's physician warned that surgery would be too dangerous and could result in her death. Eventually, toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in Deborah's blood. A criminal investigation into Deborah's poisoning was launched. Tests conducted on her hair showed that she had been exposed to approximately 30 grams of arsenic in varying doses since May. During questioning, Deborah recalled that her symptoms began after eating soup Anthony had prepared for her. Investigators suspected Anthony had been poisoning her over time. Deborah granted police permission to search their home, where they discovered ant killer containing arsenic. Further evidence revealed that Anthony had purchased the poison using his credit card. He was subsequently brought in for questioning. Anthony admitted to poisoning Deborah, but suggested that the relatives of his deceased patient, Sarah, who passed away after surgery, might have been involved. Due to insufficient evidence, Anthony was released. Deborah was discharged from the hospital, though she remained in a wheelchair and needed ongoing treatment at home. Later, a former cellmate of Anthony's, who had shared a prison cell with him, contacted the police. The cellmate revealed that Anthony had discussed his wife, Deborah's life insurance policy, and his relationship with his mistress. According to the cellmate, Anthony confessed he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and obtain the insurance payout. He had even asked the cellmate for advice on poisoning someone. Recorded phone conversations confirmed that Anthony maintained contact with the cellmate after his release from prison. With this evidence, Anthony was arrested on May 9, 2000 for attempted murder. While he initially denied poisoning Deborah, he eventually pleaded guilty at the end of 2000. Prosecutors proved that Anthony had been adding small doses of poison to Deborah's food and planning to send her for gallbladder surgery, hoping she would die during the procedure. His motive was to prove he wasn't the only doctor to lose a patient on the operating table, reclaim his reputation, and regain financial success. He also sought to justify Sarah's death. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 12 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to file lawsuits, claiming that Deborah intentionally consumed arsenic to end her life. However, Deborah refuted this in interviews, stating she would never harm herself and even suggested Anthony should experience arsenic poisoning. Following the trial, she divorced Anthony and obtained a protective order prohibiting him from contacting her or their children. Deborah endured a lengthy recovery process after the poisoning. She revealed in interviews that she suffered lasting health issues, including reduced limb mobility and sensitivity, and required outside assistance for daily life. In December 2013, Anthony was released from prison and moved back to New York, where he worked as a grocery delivery man. He legally changed his name to Tony Hote in 2014, explaining that he wanted a fresh start. By 2016, he launched a cosmetic company and falsely portrayed himself as a practicing doctor on the business website. He marketed a product called the Plasma Protocol, claiming it was the first anti-aging skincare treatment derived from a person's DNA plasma. The company operated near his previous plastic surgery clinic. Neighbors began reporting suspicious activities at Anthony's residence, including deliveries of surgical supplies and frequent visits from women in the evenings. These reports prompted police attention, leading Anthony to shut down his business and move to Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. New York police warned law enforcement in Palm Beach about Anthony, describing him as one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. By 2019, Anthony was advertising elder care services online and continued to move freely across the country. Florida authorities monitored him, but there remained concerns about whether he posed a risk to others. As for Deborah, she maintained a private life and struggled with the lasting impact of Anthony's actions, unable to fully recover her health or independence. Julie Irene Oldag, later known as Julie Keown, had a peaceful and happy childhood in the town of Plattsburgh, Missouri, located in the heart of the American Midwest. Born on May 16, 1973, she was the eldest of two children. Growing up alongside her younger brother, Chad, Julie's parents, Nancy and Jack, were well-respected members of the community. They lived modestly but comfortably, sustained by their farm work. Growing up on the farm taught Julie responsibility and humility. Julie left a lasting impression on everyone she met. She was empathetic, selfless, and always ready to help others, with a calming presence that put people at ease. Her quiet strength and sense of purpose developed early. Academically, she excelled thanks to the support of her loving family. She attended high-quality schools and consistently earned praise from her teachers. Her compassion eventually inspired her to pursue a career in nursing. Determined to make a difference, she enrolled at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri, There, she not only thrived academically, but also formed close friendships. However, she sometimes felt as though something was missing. Seeing many of her friends embark on romantic relationships, Julie was eager to find someone to spend her life with. Through a mutual friend, she was set up on a blind date with fellow student James Keown. James, a year younger than Julie, had a personality that contrasted with hers. Charismatic, outgoing, and ambitious, James was well known on campus for his work at the college radio station and his aspirations for a career in broadcasting. Coming from a privileged background, James was the son of a respected lobbyist and his wife, Betty, who had high hopes for their 6 children. James stood out in his family for his bold, confident personality and ability to command attention, traits that were both admired and controversial. In Julie, he found a calm, gentle presence that complemented his own strong energy. Meanwhile, Julie was attracted to James's drive and enthusiasm. Their connection was instantaneous, and they soon became inseparable, forming a well-known couple on campus. While still in college, James began working as a local radio host, quickly becoming a familiar voice in the community. Julie remained focused on her nursing studies and clinical training, preparing for the challenges of her career. After graduating, they married and moved to Kansas City, eager to build their life together. Both flourished professionally. Julie became a nurse whose empathy and dedication to her work made her exceptional. She treated each patient with care and respect, earning the admiration of her colleagues and superiors. Meanwhile, James continued to advance in his radio career, managing roles at 2 stations and steadily building his reputation. Together, they appeared to have a perfect life, young, ambitious, and dedicated to their professions. Their relationship was built on shared values, mutual support, and a balance of Julie's calm demeanor and James's outgoing nature. However, as James's career grew, so did the demands on his time. His schedule became packed with meetings and side projects, leaving little time for rest or quality time together. Although their home was filled with love, it often felt empty due to their busy lives. Both juggled early mornings, long days, and late nights, caught up in a fast-paced rhythm. Despite his hectic schedule, James made an effort to keep their relationship strong. He surprised Julie with weekend trips and thoughtful gifts, small tokens of his affection that she deeply appreciated, even though she never asked for them. Julie adored James deeply, her love for him unwavering and steadfast. Since James's career required frequent moves, they adapted by living in cities like Chicago before eventually returning to Kansas. Although these relocations were challenging, Julie supported James wholeheartedly, adjusting to each new environment with grace. James was known professionally for his creativity, adaptability, and sharp mind. With a background in marketing, his skills and innovative ideas made him an invaluable employee, which was reflected in his impressive income. His family enjoyed a comfortable and privileged lifestyle, owning a beautiful home and traveling frequently. He appreciated luxury, wearing fine watches, driving new cars, and regularly upgrading them. In contrast, Julie valued simple pleasures. Her family noticed how well she seemed to be doing and felt happy about her marriage to James, which outwardly appeared both harmonious and successful. As time passed, relatives began to inquire about their plans to have children. However, for James and Julie, this was a painful subject. They had been trying to conceive for years without success, despite undergoing countless tests, consulting specialists, and exploring every available option. There was no medical explanation for their infertility. Despite the hardship, they remained hopeful and continued with their lives, bearing the heavy weight of uncertainty. James redirected his focus to his career, pursuing personal growth and professional recognition. Already well regarded in his local community as a radio presenter, James set his sights higher. In 2003, he applied to Harvard Business School and was accepted with a prestigious scholarship. This achievement transformed their lives. They moved to Boston so James could start his studies, while Julie transitioned to remote work in medical software development. James also took on remote marketing projects. Although Julie wholeheartedly supported his ambitions, the move created emotional challenges for her. She missed her family, their home in Missouri, and the sense of familiarity she had left behind. Nevertheless, her love for James and her pride in his accomplishments kept her devoted to him. At Harvard, James surrounded himself with influential people and worked hard to build an impressive public image. Yet, despite his many achievements, he always seemed to crave more. Meanwhile, Julie continues to hope for a baby, although her health begins to decline alarmingly. Around 8 months after their move to Boston, she started experiencing constant fatigue, muscle pain, and frequent illnesses. Multiple medical exams provided no clear answers. Then, on August 20th, 2004, her condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. She woke up disoriented, with severe headaches, and found herself unable to perform basic tasks. She slurred her words, struggled to write, and felt the world spinning. Alarmed, James rushed her to the hospital, where her symptoms quickly worsened. Doctors immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition and conducted urgent tests. Suspicion fell on her kidneys as her health declined rapidly. By August 2004, Julie received life-changing news: her kidneys were no longer functioning properly. This became the first real clue to her long-standing health struggles, including infertility, though the connection was not fully understood. Despite extensive testing, her symptoms, muscle weakness, confusion, and fatigue did not align entirely with typical kidney failure cases. Some doctors initially suspected that Julie might have a rare kidney condition, but they were unable to arrive at a definitive diagnosis. After spending 3 days in the hospital, her condition unexpectedly improved without any clear medical intervention. With no solid explanation for her symptoms beyond potential kidney issues, she was discharged. Although the doctors were baffled, her symptoms eased, and she became eager to move forward, hoping to recover both emotionally and physically. She took a short trip to Missouri to visit her family, surrounded by loved ones and the comforting familiarity of home. Julie's spirits lifted, her strength returned, and her family was relieved to see her smiling and full of energy once more. It seemed the worst was behind her. However, this relief was short-lived. Not long after returning to Boston, Julie's health declined again. Her symptoms, dizziness, fatigue, and speech difficulties resurfaced. Albeit less severe than before, her family grew increasingly concerned, speculating that her episodes might have a psychological origin, perhaps stemming from the stress of relocating, the emotional strain of infertility, or even feelings of homesickness. Even Julie's doctors entertained the possibility that stress was a contributing factor. Yet, despite these theories, the possibility of a more serious underlying condition couldn't be ruled out. Tragically, on September 4, 2004, just 2 weeks after her initial hospitalization, Julie's condition took a dramatic and alarming turn for the worse. She was admitted to the hospital again, gravely ill, barely able to speak, nearly completely paralyzed, and soon slipping into a coma. It became evident to the medical team that her kidneys were not the primary issue. Something far more destructive and mysterious was ravaging her body. Despite extensive testing, the doctors were unable to pinpoint the cause, and Julie's organs began to fail one by one. In an unexpected breakthrough, a nurse made a critical suggestion: conduct a toxicology screening. Although such a test was uncommon in cases like Julie's, the nurse's intuition proved to be pivotal. The toxicology report revealed a horrifying truth. Julie had ethylene glycol in her system, a poisonous chemical commonly found in antifreeze and engine coolant. The symptoms of ethylene glycol poisoning, kidney failure, confusion, and severe physical decline matched Julie's condition perfectly. The report confirmed she had been deliberately poisoned. As Julie lay comatose and unresponsive on September 4th, her family rushed to the hospital, devastated by her deterioration, helpless to do anything but wait. They watched her condition worsen. After 4 days in a coma, on September 8, 2004, Julie passed away at the age of 31. Despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, the diagnosis had come too late. Her body had suffered too much damage to recover. Her sudden death left her family and friends in shock. Only days earlier, she had been laughing and talking with her loved ones. Now, she was gone. The toxicology findings immediately raised suspicions of foul play. Julie's parents were convinced that someone had intentionally poisoned her, and all signs pointed to someone close to her. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, James. Detectives launched an investigation, as the presence of ethylene glycol automatically triggered a criminal inquiry. They gathered medical records, household items, and witness statements to piece together what had happened. Publicly, James presented himself as a grieving widower, expressing shock and sorrow over Julie's untimely death. He denied any involvement, even speculating that she might have accidentally or intentionally ingested antifreeze during a moment of depression brought on by her health struggles, their move to Boston, and their inability to conceive. However, not everyone believed his claims. The nurse who initially suggested the toxicology screening later reported that James's behavior during Julie's hospital stay had been unsettling. He often dominated conversations with doctors, frequently answering questions on Julie's behalf and giving the impression that he was controlling her care. Some people argued James's actions were likely a result of Julie's illness. Perhaps he was simply trying to advocate for her when she couldn't speak for herself. However, others found his behavior suspicious. At one point, James even suggested a peculiar theory, claiming that Julie might have mistakenly consumed antifreeze, believing it to be a different liquid. Investigators became more suspicious upon learning that Julie had a $250,000 life insurance policy. At first glance, this might not seem like a strong motive for her husband, James, who seemed to live a comfortable life. However, doubts began to arise. Was James as wealthy as he appeared, or was his wealth just an illusion? Shortly after Julie's death, a new clue came to light. The landlord of James and Julie's Boston apartment contacted the authorities after James suddenly disappeared, leaving the apartment and abandoning personal belongings such as Julie's wedding dress, their wedding rings, and photos from their wedding. Items a grieving husband would typically treasure. It was soon revealed that James had returned to Missouri, where he began a new job as a talk show host at a local radio station, seemingly eager to start afresh. Investigators uncovered troubling details about James's life in Boston. He hadn't paid rent for months, his luxury car had been repossessed, and, shockingly, he had forged a letter claiming he had been accepted into Harvard Business School, a lie he used to justify working remotely for a marketing company. This company had hired him for a high-paying project to design a website, but he failed to deliver results and appeared to lack the necessary skills for the job. Instead, he embezzled funds allocated for the project. His resume was filled with fabricated job experiences, including positions at companies where he had never worked. Even Julie, his wife, was unaware of the full extent of his deceit. Despite pretending to go to work, buying new furniture, and maintaining a luxurious lifestyle, James's financial troubles deepened. He had no stable income. His utilities were about to be cut off, and he was drowning in debt. At some point, Julie's life insurance policy became a potential solution to James's mounting financial problems. Back in Missouri, James shared inconsistent stories about Julie's death with his new acquaintances. Some say she died of a mysterious illness. Others say she harmed herself. When asked what he planned to do with the insurance money, he casually remarked that he would buy a BMW. He also mentioned dating someone new and wanting to start a family. As suspicion grew, investigators turned their attention to James. Although his behavior raised numerous red flags, the evidence against him remained circumstantial. Friends recalled James confidently boasting that he couldn't be convicted because there was no direct proof. Oddly, however, he never explicitly denied involvement in Julie's death. Investigators conducted thorough searches of his Boston apartment, his family's property, and his home in Missouri, but nothing incriminating was found until they examined his computer. Despite his attempts to wipe his hard drive clean, forensic experts recovered disturbing internet searches, such as how to get rid of someone and antifreeze poisoning. These searches aligned with Julie's toxicology results. Investigators also discovered that James had encouraged Julie to drink Gatorade weeks before her death, claiming it was good for her health. Toxicology tests would later reveal that she had been poisoned with ethylene glycol, the main ingredient in antifreeze, over an extended period, explaining the mysterious illness she suffered before her death. Based on this evidence, prosecutors began building their case. In 2005, James was arrested and his trial began in 2008. Although much of the evidence was circumstantial, it painted a consistent and damning picture of James, his financial ruin, fraudulent lifestyle, and the timing of Julie's poisoning all pointed to him. Many who had once admired James were shocked to learn the extent of his lies, though some described him as a loving husband and found it difficult to believe he could commit such a calculated crime. The defense argued that Julie may have deliberately or accidentally ingested the antifreeze herself, citing her emotional struggles with poor health and infertility. They also questioned the reliability of the toxicology reports, suggesting there was no concrete evidence that James had administered the poison. Despite their efforts to cast doubt the search history, James's encouragement for Julie to drink Gatorade, the life insurance motive, and his pattern of deceit proved overwhelming for the jury. Although no physical container of antifreeze was found, the evidence revealed Julie had been gradually poisoned. In her final weeks, she had confided in friends that James had been attentive and had repeatedly urged her to drink Gatorade, despite her dislike of it. What is most suspicious is that after Julie passed away, James rushed to claim the insurance money and quickly moved on with his life, making his behavior even more suspicious. In 2008, James Keown was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court concluded that he had deliberately and methodically poisoned his wife by spiking her drinks with ethylene glycol, ultimately causing her death. To this day, James continues to maintain his innocence. However, Julie's family firmly believes that justice was appropriately served. In 2017, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court upheld his conviction, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Julie Keown, remembered as a compassionate nurse, a devoted wife, and a loving daughter, was tragically taken from the world far too soon. Her kindness, sincerity, and grace live on in the memories of those who knew her and in the relentless pursuit of truth that arose following her untimely passing.